Welcome, folks, to the 700 Club. Abhorrent. That's how the judge described Maxine Waters' outrageous comments during the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. Could her comments result in the whole trial being overturned? Meanwhile, as the jurors decide the verdict, Minneapolis and other cities across America prepare for possible violence. Jenna Browder brings us the story.
After weeks of testimony, we now wait for the jury to decide the fate of Derek Chauvin. Both sides resting their cases and making their closing arguments clear.
It's exactly what you saw with your eyes. It's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder.
The prosecution insisting George Floyd did not pose a threat to the officers.
Just a human, just a man, lying on the pavement, being pressed upon, desperately crying out.
And pushing the point that the entire profession is not on trial, just one former police officer. The defense arguing that the entire episode should be seen in context.
A reasonable police officer would, in fact, take into consideration the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. Their experience with the subject, the struggle that they had.
And that bystanders seemed like a threat, and the cause of Floyd's death were drug use and heart disease.
The failure of the state's experts to acknowledge any possibility at all, that any of these other factors in any way contributed to Mr. Floyd's death defies medical science, and it defies common sense.
Deliberations are now underway for the jury, a diverse group of 5 men and 7 women. 4 black, 6 white, and 2 identifying as multiracial. And as the nation awaits a verdict, there are now concerns a U.S. representative may have disrupted the process. California's Maxine Waters telling protesters in Minneapolis that she's hoping for a guilty verdict.
We got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
The judge in this case weighing in.
I'll give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function.
GOP Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he'll introduce a resolution in the House to censure Waters. Meanwhile, cities across the country are preparing for possible unrest. In Minneapolis, 2,000 National Guard troops are ready to defend the streets. The governor asking for help from Ohio and Nebraska. And deliberations could take anywhere from hours to days or even weeks. The judge telling jurors yesterday, hope for short, plan for long. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
You know, folks, I want to make one thing clear. What Chauvin did, and did so publicly, has resulted in millions and millions of dollars of damage all across the nation. It has resulted in riots and terrible unrest in city after city, and it's all because of one bad cop. And my personal feeling is that there's no sentence too strong for that man to receive. That's just the way it is. I just cannot believe that somebody like that would go unpunished. Now, Maxine Waters has got no business going up there and telling people they ought to riot. That's terrible. We have to leave the thing inside the courtroom. But at the same time, my personal feeling is that there is no sentence too difficult to give to Derek Chauvin for what he did, and it was all done on camera. We all looked at it. Everybody saw it. He had his knee on the man's neck for time enough, and the man was saying, I can't breathe, and it didn't matter. And we were trying to say, have they got some relationship outside of this? That there had to be some explanation for why Chauvin was doing what he was doing, because he was clearly killing the man. And he did it on television, and you saw the pictures, and it has caused untold damage throughout our nation. Well, in other news, a blow to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's lost a crucial vote in the Knesset. could it cost him his chance to remain prime minister? I, for one, can't make heads nor tails of what's going on in Israel. But it's a shame, given the trouble there is in the Middle East, that Israel is now weakened. George Thomas has more.
Pat, that is right. It is a political mess right there in the middle of the Middle East. Netanyahu's opponent scored, as you mentioned, a big win in the Knesset, presenting greater challenges to forming a governing coalition and potentially blocking him from becoming prime minister. Chris Mitchell has the details from Jerusalem.
The anti-Netanyahu coalition won the vote in the powerful Knesset Arrangements Committee that controls the parliament until a new government is formed. In 2 weeks, Netanyahu's mandate to form a coalition expires, allowing the committee to approve legislation blocking Netanyahu.
The hope would be for the opposition that they could potentially pass laws which would retroactively invalidate Netanyahu from forming a coalition, either on the basis of retroactive term limits, which Netanyahu would have already exceeded, or on the basis of the criminal trials which are currently undergoing, not allowing a prime minister to form a government while under trial.
An Islamist party called Ra'am joined a coalition of anti-Netanyahu factions to win the vote. The leader of the anti-Netanyahu bloc, Yair Lapid, promised Ra'am leader Mansour Abbas a number of positions in exchange for the alliance. Abbas, with his 4 seats in parliament, has become a kingmaker, and Netanyahu was counting on his backing to form a governing coalition.
There's a lot of people in Israeli society on both sides that really don't want to see an Islamist party, even if it is making steps towards reconciling some of its differences, be the one that determines who's going to be the prime minister and the makeup of the next government.
The vote leaves Israel's political landscape in a state of uncertainty. Blue and white leader Benny Gantz warned about political instability and said if we don't unite among ourselves, we won't be strong against our enemies.
Pat, to imagine an Islamist party holding sway in Israeli politics, unbelievable.
CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now. Chris, I can't make head nor tail of what's going on. Would you please clarify it for me?
Well, I'll try to do that. Pat, there's 2 things going on. Certainly, first of all, we talked about the deliberations and the machinations right now in the parliamentary system. But right now, I think from a larger geopolitical view, and you alluded to that earlier, it's surrounded by its enemies, and not from a political point of view. But you could surmise that the mullahs in Tehran would be ecstatic if Netanyahu won't be the leader of Israel. He's been their #1 adversary for many years, and I'm not sure, and I think many others are, there's not sure another Israeli leader with his stature on the world scene or who could carry this anti-Iran mantle. What it's also doing geopolitically right now, Pat, it's kind of unnerving some of the new allies of Israel, the United Arab Emirates, some of the Gulf states, and Saudi Arabia. And it also sort of emboldens and enables those who want to re-enter the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And all of this could be destabilizing and dangerous to the region if there's a new leader in Israel, and they certainly would test that leader. So that's all looking at it from a geopolitical perspective. Here internally, the internal politics are very, very complicated.
Well, Netanyahu, I understand, has got 2 weeks to form a coalition. What do these 2 weeks look like?
Well, there's going to be a lot of smoke-filled rooms. Well, maybe not smoke-filled rooms, and people aren't smoking, but a lot of backroom deals are going to be going on right now, Pat. There's also negotiations going on in public, and I'll give you an example. I was talking to a political analyst earlier today. Now, a Likud leader, who's the head of this arrangements committee, he said that what's going to happen is Likud is going into the opposition. Now, that's probably something he wouldn't say if he's sending a signal to some of the right-wing politicians. I'll give you an example, Naftali Bennett and others who really could go into the opposition unless they do something. So right now, Pat, there's going to be a lot of pressure on individuals in these right-wing anti-Netanyahu parties to defect. Netanyahu may need only 1 or 2 seats, which could change the whole dynamic. And that would avoid the government supported by a party called Ra'am that really doesn't believe in the Jewish state. So 2 weeks is a long time in politics, and especially here in Israeli politics. And so a lot of backroom deals, a lot of negotiations going on privately and publicly.
Last question. Do you think Netanyahu can pull it off?
Well, this vote against him in the Arrangements Committee, it really makes it less likely. But still, he's been in this situation before. And it's really going to be a matter, I think, of these right-wing politicians, whether or not they're looking at their future. Do they want to be part of a left-wing government? Or a part of a government that's supported by this Arab party that really is a non-Zionist, anti-Israel party. It remains to be seen whether or not he can convince 1 or 2 of them to come on his side and get it done. He's got till May 4th. We'll see what happens. And a lot of people are going to be praying to see what's going to be happening to Israel in the next 2 weeks. It's going to be very, very important time, especially given the geopolitics.
One last comment. The Lord said a house divided can't stand. And if that country is split the way it is, America is split apart, it's just a hunting ground for our enemies to come after us. Is that the way you see it?
Exactly, Pat. And this is a house divided pretty much like the United States is, almost right down the line. I mean, we have 59 seats, 61 seats, very much divided, and it really doesn't help Israel, especially surrounded by enemies as it is, especially as Iran is getting closer and closer to a nuclear device. It really needs to be a house united, not divided, in such a time as this.
Chris Mitchell, thank you, my friend. George?
Here we're talking about the Middle Eastern chaos. We move to a part of the region also that is in the spotlight, turning to the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine. A leaked memo just out from Ukraine's defense ministry shows Russia's military is encircling the country. The latest move, Russia's plans to hold military exercises in the strategic Black Sea through October, effectively cutting off commercial shipping lanes. Ukraine says that threatens to strangle its economy. The U.S. State Department condemned the action, but the Pentagon canceled plans to send 2 warships to the Black Sea. All of this happening as Russia is building up military forces on its border with Ukraine. An EU official estimates there are as many as 150,000 Russian troops right there on the border. Ukraine officials believe it's likely Russia wants to provoke a conflict, justifying a military incursion into their country. And Pat, Wall Street Journal coming out this morning with dramatic satellite images showing the buildup right there on the Crimean Peninsula as well as on the eastern Ukrainian border.
It's amazing. Ukraine gave up their intermediate nukes in order to be protected by NATO, and NATO isn't doing one blessed thing to help them. And Russia may well just gobble up Ukraine, saying it's part of Greater Russia, and it belonged to us under the Soviet time, and we're going to take it back. And the U.S. isn't prepared to do anything. When we let them take Crimea, as they did, then this is next. And the Ukrainians, Terry, you have worked in Ukraine with those orphans. What's going on, in your opinion?
Well, we have a lot of work in the war zone, actually, because there are a lot of people trapped there. So there are children who need to be able to come into scenarios where they can study. There are people who need food along that way, people who need hope and the message of the gospel.
Are they trying to get out? Are they afraid what happens when Russia comes in?
Some have tried to get out. Many have left, but there are some who don't have any place to go.
Yeah.
And so they're stuck there, in a sense.
Well, that's the war we've got.